Hey everybody, are we live? Hello. Annika, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. Katja, all good?
All good, how are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. Mohammed, you there? Okay, anyway. Good evening and welcome to the first of a series of artist-curator discussions under the title, which sits over my shoulder, Artistic Cosmos, World-Making and the New Normals. The series is presented by the Cosmosco Foundation, Moscow, in collaboration with the New Center for Research and Practice in Berlin. My name is Simon Rees, Artistic Director of Cosmosco, and on behalf of our organization and our founder, Margarita Pushkina, and my colleague, Anastasia Ivanova, who heads our foundation, I'm glad to be welcoming you here in Screen Space. I'm a sometime audience member and contributor to the New Center online discussions, and I'm equally glad to be introducing the platform developed in conversation with Mohammed Salemi, who heads the center and brings to this discussion a well-seasoned audience and fan base. The Cosmosco Foundation is dedicated to building capacity within the Russian art scene, encouraging the development of artists, curators, and culture managers through discourse and dialogue, of which this is one, including by building bridges between the scenes of Moscow and wider Russia and the world. For decades, general publics, or what we most often call audiences, have divested themselves of imagination and creative impetuses for the sake of a constitutive consumerism. They've ceded all rights to world-making to artists. It's a tragedy, I know, and hence the theme of Mohammed's projects with us, which I love. That said, in recent weeks, we have all been forced to reconstitute claims on our own consciousness and the collective consciousness, which I hope still exists, and make worlds in our respective homes and living spaces, and find ways of telling about them to outside worlds. Of course, at the beginning of the lockdown, there was a flood of amateur online creativity, which has now shrunk to a trickle, leaving the online ground well-watered for artists and cultural producers to do their tilling hereafter. Speaking out their view onto the artistic cosmos, the constitution of worlds and worldviews, and the relativity of new normals in relation to their respective practices are artist Katja Novitskova and curator Annika Kuhlmann. Katja is an Estonian artist who is based in Amsterdam, where she's calling in from, and is best known to many of you for her Estonian National Pavilion at the Venice Biennale a couple of years ago. And Annika was also based in Berlin, like the center, is best known in her role in your city as executive director of the Schinkel Pavilion. I hand it over and welcome Katja and Annika. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon.
Thank you very much, Simon.
So, shall we just start?
Yes, I was going to say, how do we start, Katja? Do you want to talk about, yeah, go ahead.
I mean, just to thank first Simon and Mohammed and the whole team for inviting us in this short, quick time that we had to prepare the talk. Yeah, just a pleasure to do it, and we can start.
Yes, absolutely. I'll join. Thank you. Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here and excited to speak about, yeah, the new normal.
Yeah, we sort of, we had a quick chat yesterday with Annika about what we want to talk today about. And we kind of realized that from both of our perspectives, and also from the perspective of Annika as an artist, which she also is, we just realized that a lot of the topics that are sort of concerning to us are very practical and sort of immediate. And I think this is maybe relevant to a lot of people at the moment, that the issues of how to, continue with your practice, how to make a living, how to sort of reimagine your practice, how to, commit, how to face your already existing commitments and deadlines that were brought up in the normal sort of so-called normal conditions in normal world. And so now it's just this like kind of a waterfall of events and of somehow changes that is happening that I still haven't fully kind of rationally decided how I'm going to change my practice or how I'm going to react to the new conditions and things like kind of a possible, economic collapse, or especially of the art world or things like this. And so this, I think these practical questions are somehow actually the core topic for everybody. And then looking at them, you sort of realize that the way things were normal back, half a year ago, were normal because we also already adapted to certain conditions of how things used to be, institutionally, and with our ability to travel several times a month, or our ability to, go to the studio or interact with multiple collaborators at the same time, even things like kind of communal, like kind of install or things like this, that is not even possible at the moment. So yeah, this is like the starting point, and I think we're gonna go out of that sort of baseline condition questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Katja. I think that's a very good introduction, I guess, to the topics that felt, when we yesterday briefly spoke, most urgent to us. And yeah, it's interesting for me. Simon introduced me as in my capacity as director at Chico Pavilion, and Katja, you mentioned that I also work closely with the artist Christopher Calendar Thomas, where my curatorial practice kind of becomes very fluid between looking at things from the institutional curatorial side and being very closely involved with artistic processes. And I guess in that double function, I guess I've become acutely aware of like the multiple realities that have been changing within the field of art over the last couple of weeks. And it's definitely a very interesting time where a lot of things seem possible, and a lot of things are, I guess, very, very precarious and unsure. And I think one interesting thing that we spoke about yesterday in relation to both of our practices, and maybe we can talk a little bit more about like where we're coming from and what we've been doing over the last years, just as a way of introducing ourselves also a bit more. But I feel like what became very clear for both of us is that on one hand, of course, we are confronted with like the huge insecurities of like everything being pushed and uprooted, but at the same time, in a sense, it being the accelerator for a lot of things that we've been already interested in before, and that we've been thinking about over the last years. How is that for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's like somehow it's like a long curve story, but in the beginning of my practice, I didn't have a studio, and I only had like 10 years ago, literally, maybe 2009, 2010. My studio was my laptop, and I worked from a desk or in my bed or whatever, and I was making kind of net arty or early post-internet arty things with like social media like Tumblr or just little website stuff. And that made sense to the conditions that I had back then. And actually, it's interesting that it's also coincided with like the sort of 2008 economical crisis. But I was also just graduating my master's, so I didn't have, even if it wasn't a crisis, that would be my sort of conditions. And then I went through this loop of becoming a real artist and then gaining studio practice, and also gaining opportunities to exhibit in like big institutions, museums, make and ship and plan installations and sculpture work that all requires, you know, multiple people to handle, to make, and to somehow plan. And then, and it's still sort of possible, like in a way, I still have a studio, for example, but I haven't been to my studio in 3 months because my studio is in Berlin, and I decided to voluntarily quarantine in Amsterdam because I was here when the lockdown started. And so now I'm back to maybe considering the loop again, that I have a computer, and this is going to be my station for a while, and how I can somehow adjust and respond to the new conditions, if I am going to stay on the computer more, if I'm going to go back to the studio. And this is somehow up in the air. Like, I mean, I have to pay rent every month, but I'm barely using it. So does it make sense? What's the sort of what's the plan here? And then it also, of course, makes me question the type of work that I make. You know, like, do I really need a studio? Like, why do I need a studio? Why did I, I only needed a studio because there was a demand for a type of work that you can make in the studio. And maybe, maybe I just need a room, not like a proper professional studio. And so this is like the kind of loop that we're in now. And that is interesting because it sort of makes you, again, something that we went through, like I went through, but most, most young people now who are in art schools at the moment, or are just graduated art schools and they cannot afford a studio, this is anyway what they are used to as well, just like me 10 years ago. So it's just like, makes me think again about sort of the resources versus the art, and what kind of demand and supply is created, and what happens when this chain is broken. There's no functional art fairs this year except the online ones where the mega galleries are the only ones successful and all that. So yeah, this is sort of my kind of loop, but how has it been with you, Shinka and Christopher and you?
Well, different narratives, different loops, actually. I mean, thinking about, maybe I start with the ongoing practice that I've developed together with Christopher, who is the artist Christopher Thomas, who I've been collaborating with over the last, I think, 5 years now, probably. And the first show we did together was in 2016 for the Berlin Biennial, when we developed like the first presentation of a body of work that we have called New Elam. And in a sense, what was really striking to me is that, one of the base ideas of New Elam since 2016 for us was that, in a sense, the home is going to be a main side of production in the future, right? And how more and more people working in more and more flexible ways will be working from home, basically. And I think what's been really interesting for us in this COVID-19 crisis that's going on is that obviously this thought that we've had and that we've been following and exploring in multiple ways over the last years has now become a very tangible future, and not just for artists who, as you say, many of whom have been working like this for a very long time, but for like more and more people, and for people who this kind of lifestyle and this idea of working from home kind of seem to be I guess, unimaginable or very far-fetched for a very long time. So in a way, and just like you, we've been working from home. That idea of the home becoming side of production is very much rooted in our own lives. And we've been living between different cities, which now has like changed quite rapidly. Christopher is in London, I'm in Berlin. Our team is spread all over the world. We have collaborators in New York and in Los Angeles, and plans to come together and work together on shows obviously have evaporated, while the shows have evaporated as well, been shifted into 2021 or 2022. Like timelines, I feel like have definitely changed. And with those changing timelines and the changing conditions for production, I think, yes, it is a moment to also rethink like what is a relevant work to make right now, and what kind of form should it take, right? Just as you've been saying, like, is this a moment to go back to a different type of working? Is this a moment to think about new formats? Is there new demand, and will there therefore be a new supply, and how do these things condition each other, right? And then I guess for me it's especially interesting because I also work on the other side of that in an institution where I do very much think about at least, you know, one part of the demand for new formats and one part of the supply for new formats, and how we as an institution can react to this changing situation. And obviously, you know, for Schinkel Pavilion, just as for many other institutions worldwide, it's been quite a shock to have to be forced to leave our space and to completely rethink how we will exist in the future. Like, what's going to happen this year, but not only this year, but also on like longer timelines.
I also like remember that you guys wanted to make your home into some sort of conceptual project. Is that a thing?
Well, I mean, we did not necessarily want to make our own home into a conceptual project, but the home itself and the home as a site of production kind of has been the core of an exploration that we've been doing into the future of living, and where we, you know, we're very much interested in rethinking how people live and rethinking the role of the home, of the apartment, of that private space at the core of society, and how that, you know, architecture could be changed through a different way of inhabiting space, and how that then again might lead to a reformation of society in a way, you know, through the home, I guess, as a technology, if you want.
Yeah, and also like this, I mean, this Twitter CEO, he just said that like all Twitter workers can stay workers even after the quarantine is over. But it also like makes this big new shift between the essential ones who need to leave the house and the ones who can have a small factory office at home. And these are two completely different classes of people. They're like,
yes.
Somehow there's a new conflict. There's always been a certain class conflict, but now it's very clear. Like there's people like, you know, post mailmen and nurses and stuff who have to go out every day, and then there's us who is like, I think there was a moment when I was stuck at home for 2 weeks, like without leaving.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also interesting, right, how that idea of essentiality obviously is not reflected in status or income. So yeah, that idea of like being able to stay home as a non-essential worker is obviously also tied to having a status where you don't have to leave home, where you're not forced to leave home, right? And I feel like essentiality has become or has got a real dark turn somehow in the way we use it, similar to the way we talk about heroes in the context of COVID-19.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you have no choice.
Yes.
For it to be one. And in that sense, like, I feel completely somehow, you know, I'm terrified for the next year because of just the uncertainty of the whole, you know, machine that we are part of, which is this sort of art machine that we don't know where it will end up. You know, we have certain promises that were, you know, some contracts we have from a while ago, but they're definitely not enough to live, you know, in the long run. And so it's like, should I just radically change my life plan now, or should I just wait? But if I wait, I'm going to waste time. And there's this sort of, even though I'm currently just doing normally my deadlines that are sort of upcoming, okay, my shows were postponed, but they're still planned sort of. I also, at the same time, every day I have to think about this sort of very core also survival questions of just like, is this really the right thing to do? Should I be writing this text now?
Yeah.
Or should I just be sort of, learning a new skill that this might be useful for me. And
yeah, I know, it's interesting, right? This like need to do something with the time. I had that too. I called Christopher yesterday. I was like, Christopher, I'm gonna learn Python now.
Yeah.
I have to be able to do all of this myself. It's the only language that I need to learn, right? And he was like, oh God, no, you should actually learn not to do everything yourself. But I don't know, I had this urge, and I read this text online about a woman who like thinks about, how to actually harvest corn to make like your own flour, right? And how we have kind of talking about essentiality, right? Maybe unlearned like essential knowledge that might help in the situation that we're currently in, right? But I mean, taking that back to an artistic practice, do you think that your practice is actually going to change for this? I mean, I understand all the infrastructure changes, right? But do you feel the need to redirect, to think about other things, to address it in other ways?
I feel like it will change. It was already going to change, but now it's forced to change even more, in a sense that I actually, as you mentioned, this acceleration is that before COVID, I already had this sort of sensation that, okay, my health hasn't been very good. I'm not capable of being in the studio 8 hours a day, and sort of been planning on this transition towards more domestic a space of production again. And also, as you say, like work maybe more with online collaborators rather than offline ones in the studio. And which is weird already, because it does create a certain alienation. I don't like to be alone in the room with a computer all day, even if Zoom is still weird. But I was somehow practically thinking towards that already, and with that I was like, okay, I just need to rethink how if I want to make a sculpture, I'll just start playing with 3D sculpting softwares more, or game engines, as we were mentioning. And then it's and then I sort of was slowly getting into that mood, and then COVID hit. And actually, when the lockdown started, my initial voluntary desire to just learn all these new techniques to make sculptures behind the computer, new for me. They actually kind of paused more. They kind of stopped, because then now it was like a forced thing. Like I have to figure this out. And also there's no certainty on like how to make a living with that, because I'm like, yeah, I want to make a small video game, and I want to have some sort of like a little environment, a little world building, a little like artifact, a little artifact based somehow narrative. And then I realized, okay, I mean, I can try to learn, as you were with Python, I can try to learn it myself, but then I will spend like a year on it if I do it myself, or if I hire other people. I don't know if I'll be able to pay them everything that I'm supposed to pay them by the end of the project. And I also don't know what I'm going to do with this game. So there's just this sort of like kind of really direct, just questions like, should I even start then, or should I just do something that is like more conservative or smaller scale or whatever. So it's just this I'm definitely not beginning to make a big installation unless now somebody comes to me and like we have
buys it in advance.
Yeah, like we have budget, and we even it doesn't matter if it's in 2 years or not, this is coming. I have one project like that. Actually, one project I have, which is I'm working on a public art commission for a hospital.
Oh, wow.
And in Denmark. And this hospital is still being built, and it was not canceled or anything, and everything, the conditions are all the same. And so that is sort of interesting, but it might be the only real like core project that remains for me for the next 2 years that is like not canceled. It's just this hospital art, because the new hospital needs to be built because, you know, there's a need for hospitals at the moment, and they have this like art budget, and so I'm doing that. But it's also weird to be doing that because I'm like, well, don't they need, you know, in many countries your hospital budget needs to go to like, you know, protection devices and ventilators, and you know.
Are you going to make a ventilator?
No.
Or a huge mask?
Exactly. No, I mean, I don't want to hoard this money that maybe should go to some more useful you know, purposes. But then in Denmark there's no shortage, I guess, of ventilators, and they're not going to give it to, I don't know, Brazil. And so I'm supposed to make an art, and I looked into research into, you know, art in hospitals, and there is a clear research that it does help mentally for people to see art in the hospital. It's really important for them not to feel that they're in this laboratory isolated from the world, and subconsciously it is very healing. So I'm like, okay, this is maybe maximum what I can do now to the world, just to create some little aesthetic bumps and attention grabbing little things that will make life somehow more bearable.
Yeah.
But then I don't know to which extent and what scale, and I mean, it also, of course, depends how long this state will last. I mean, maybe the back to new normal will happen, but I think I'm not, you know, nobody knows. And
you know, I'm really curious because in your work you have talked a lot about, and you thought a lot about animals and images and about understanding them as technologies, right? And that's like part of like an ecosystemic evolution, and that is made of, or an ecosystem that's made of like human and non-human actors, basically, right? And they all like co-evolve together and produce these forms in a sense. Something that Christoph and I have also been thinking about in our last work, Being Human. So I don't know, thinking about the virus, it just seems to be an insanely efficient technology. What do you think about it as a technology?
That's another accelerator that I started to make a biotech exhibition like before COVID. So like my supposedly new topic in my practice was supposed to be like kind of biomolecular, biotech related. As basically like, again, the intersection of life and something that is like an industry, with all the logic of an industry, like business, and but I mean less business interest for me, but more just the clash of systems. You know, you have a living systems like, you know, bacteria or laboratory animals or whatever, and you have a sort of industry and especially like now computational approach to biology. And so I've been sort of in this theme for a while already. Since like a few years I started to be obsessed with laboratory microorganisms, and so now with the COVID, like it's of course, you know, I read a lot of stuff about it, and it's sort of interesting on several levels, of course. And one level is that I don't see how it can be like a bioweapon, just because, again, of this like immense complexity of anything living that is still much more complex than kind of a clear numerical code. And something like even the virus, to design that is like, it's impossible. Like no, not a single, I don't think an AI can design something that will be so functional and so effective in a way, and so real. So even now, the whole world is grappling to design like the tiny, proteins or some sort of vaccine approaches or cure approaches that are all like, it's easier sort of to do that than to design an organism like that. Although viruses are not even considered life forms, they're considered somehow in between. Some viruses are closer to life forms and some are very primitive, and COVID is pretty simple. And so it's been interesting to see also like the one sort of tiny organism, like tiny, versus like this whole big geopolitical and geotechnological kind of, how do you call it, like planetary scale conglomerate of things. And yeah, it's somehow that is the scale kind of switching is very impressive in this. Just actually how little we know about living or organisms. And then the other thing is just that in a biological level, it's really an equalizer. Like, Boris Johnson got it, like all these people got it. And of course it exposed, because it's biologically, everybody is sort of susceptible to it in the same way. It again exposes kind of socio-political differences between people of who actually get sick more. And of course, despite there's few celebrities and politicians getting sick, majority of people who got sick are actually these essential workers who are sort of in the front lines of this. And so this virus is like it exposes a lot of things that are already both in this sort of biotech side of things, but also in a kind of the myths about society that we have that is still somehow being upheld. And in that sense, it's very it's been good to see how clear things get and how fast and clear they get.
Yeah, something Christopher and I have been really interested in thinking about the current situation is how it kind of forced a real-time experiment in comparative governance on us, where we can basically see and watch how different governments, how different political systems are reacting to the situation. And it's almost like, in a weird way, the death count is like the scorecard, in a very real sense, that measures the success and the failure of like how a particular system has reacted. And I really wonder how that will play out in the near future, but also in a couple of years, obviously, right? It will probably shift the power dynamics between America and China. Might not. It might shift power dynamics between tech and the state. Just today, Christopher just told me, actually, Bloomberg has announced that if what is this? Sanofi? If Sanofi actually is successful in developing the vaccine, Americans will receive it first, which is also like an insane statement on geopolitics and the real meaning of America first. I don't know. I mean, how have you thought about the geopolitical consequences of this?
Sorry to interrupt. They were already pirating like the face masks and
yes,
right? So it's already been happening.
It's like in the face of the virus, in a very strange sense, like geopolitics have become like a zero-sum game. And I don't know, I remember talking to my father a couple of weeks ago, and he's actually a doctor here in Berlin. So he's an essential worker, I guess. And my mom is too. And they're both working here in the healthcare system. And my dad was so angry. I've never experienced that before, but he was so angry about like the lack of cooperation and the lack of support that we were experiencing like within Europe, amongst European countries. And he was like strongly rooting to fly in patients from Italy, for example, and treat them in Berlin because we actually have empty beds here, right? So I feel like that's I don't know, that's like a more local, I guess, European example of how COVID has redrawn borders, but obviously we can see that on a larger scale as well.
Yeah, it's also like somehow, I don't know, but with the like, again, back to art question, is I also been thinking from the beginning of how not to, like, yeah, because especially you having your parents close to it, like how to not aestheticize or make this as like a sexy topic in work, because everybody's like always going to be like a, you know, an insane amount of an avalanche of COVID art or post-COVID art, because it's everything that people are thinking about. But it's also, for me personally, because I have a tendency of like, I'm an extremely visual person, so I have like sort of a tendency to not fetishize things, but like I respond to things visually, and of course, like if a strong image is stuck in my head, it becomes an image more than somehow, you know, what it signifies. And so I've been sort of battling with myself or seeing it in other people's practices of like how not to aestheticize this reality too much as well, in a way that is like it makes, to a certain extent, it's a form of dealing and like kind of facing it, but also, yeah, I don't want to make sexy COVID art. You know? And I mean, by sexy, I mean just appealing, you know, in the marketable in this way, and or you know, but also you sort of cannot do that, you know. Of course, you cannot ignore the reality, so you have to address it somehow. And so if we're sort of back in the old system of the art world, there will be this tendency for like, who made the best COVID art, you know, 10 like artsy article, 10 best COVID art. It's already there.
No, absolutely. Yes, the 10 best COVID art responses. Yes.
Oh my God.
If I may say something at this point.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yes.
I don't know if you've noticed, but I noticed about 10 days ago that a COVID emoji appeared in the emoji suite.
Oh, really?
Really?
iPhone. And I wondered, from the moment I saw it, I've shared it with people to say, have you noticed that a COVID emoji is now in our, in which way can you positively or properly use a COVID emoji?
Does it look like the virus?
Yeah, it's a little green COVID emoji. I'll send it to you in a...
Maybe it's the one that has been there all around, but then they redesigned it.
So, I mean, it is curious, like in what sense can that appear? I just sent it to you in our technical WhatsApp group.
It's still there.
Yeah.
It's there.
Yeah.
But
how could you positively and properly use that emoji?
But I mean, it was there before COVID, I think.
Was it? I didn't notice it.
Before. It's meant to be parents and bacteria, yeah. It's meant to be.
I think the COVID one would be red, no? Isn't it red?
Yeah.
Red.
But in what sense could that emoji ever be used except in a, you know?
I mean, in a way that you were like, when you're joking about it, when you're a teenager and you're joking about it, which is fine to joke about it, but it's still like, it's dystopian.
Yeah.
as the reality, of course.
Yes. Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's a really good interruption, because I mean, obviously there's going to be like some pop culture developing around COVID as well. And that's going to be interesting. Art is going to respond to it. And in a way that almost draws us back, right? Full circle to the beginning of the conversation. We talked about production conditions in the current situation, where I think that, yes, the one question is what will sexy COVID art look like? And obviously that's something that art has always been very good at, in turning things that it criticizes into a very attractive representation of exactly that criticism in order to
we are exactly the people who do that.
Yes, I mean that circulation of form and how to find the most attractive form, right? And to then, I guess, put interesting content into an attractive form, I think is something that art has been like very good at and has been a requirement almost. I mean, criticality as an accessory in a sense for very attractive objects. Certainly that's something we're going to see, but at the same time, I feel like the production conditions that we're currently facing are also going to produce a certain type of work, I would think, in the next couple of months that will certainly also be, it will be easy to tell when it has been produced potentially, because it is produced under certain conditions, right? And at the same time, I think the art world quite drastically changed 2016 after Donald Trump was elected. And in a sense, the Berlin Biennial, right, that we mentioned also in the beginning, almost was like a marker of a complete change in the art world. And I feel like maybe, and I don't know, obviously, but maybe what we're looking at now is a similar moment, that depending on how long this crisis is going to be, and depending on which scale we think it will have, from local to planetary, basically, there probably will be significant changes. And
I'm curious what kind, like, will it go towards like VR and video games and online streaming platform sort of as main platforms for artistic expression, or will it just be drawings in someone's room? And maybe it's going to be
or a lot of Zoom conversations that everyone's going to be having.
Performances, but also like it's like we've been doing it for a couple of months and everybody's tired of that, no, somehow. So by then, so I don't know.
I don't know. On the other hand, you know, I've seen, and that's something that I got actually quite excited about, is I've seen like really beautiful formats that I have not experienced or expected before, and certainly something you all have experienced probably, like Prem Krishnamurthy's like Sunday sessions were like really amazing and touching, and a new way of engaging with art and with artists and thinkers from all over the world, creating like a joint space for a certain moment that could go from, I don't know, like almost like a collective therapy session to like spontaneous karaoke to a lecture to a studio visit, all fluid in the same space with people coming and going. And I don't know, I felt there was something special about it that was new to me. And I feel like it's something similar with the home cooking sessions that Mariana Simnit and Asad Raza are doing. And I wonder whether those practices point towards a new type of institution almost, you know, that could appear, that could emerge in the situation, that is no longer in one place, that maybe no longer has a building, that works differently, that emerges from within a group of people out of a practice. And that then, of course, and that's, I think, also something we spoke about yesterday briefly, Katja, will require a new funding structure. And no idea what that will look like, but I think that's one of the interesting challenges. Is like, if we want these new formats, how will we fund them?
And I wanted to ask two things about this, which is like, one thing is like what would happen to this beautiful Schinkel building? You know, it would be great to have Schinkel as an online community, but then there's this beautiful building, and it's like, you know, and so you feel like you have to stick with the building as well. I'm sure there's this conservative, as we were saying, this conservative in the sense of conservation. We just want to conserve, you know, you don't want to uproot completely this place that was built up for so long and has all this special energy. And that's like that is somehow, of course, everything in the end, everything comes and goes. There'll be a day there'll be no Schinkel Pavilion, but it's like maybe in a couple 100 years, not next year. That's what.
Actually, talking about that, I mean, for us, the question of leaving the building is a really real question, and it's not it's not that far away. And when we did the series Disappearing Berlin last year, I mean, one aspect of that series certainly always was to think about what would happen if we had to leave Schinkel. And you know, it's a very simple equation, because the building, just like the Julia Stoschek building actually, is owned by the state. And there is certain requirements that constitute that these buildings have to be used in an economic way, which means that rents can be raised, buildings can be refurbished, right? And we could actually lose our lease at any given moment. So what's happening to Julia right now is, in a weird way, a warning sign for us as well. It's alarming. And it's a really real threat, especially given the constant, you know, buildings going up, the new townhouses around Schinkel, the change of that city structure in especially that area, the prices going up. I mean, we are at risk. And I think that forces something on us that actually has been like really productive, and like using the city as a place where art can happen in very different locations and unexpected constellations, understanding art as something that emerges from communities, understanding it as something that happens, that can constitute an institute itself in a way, has been interesting. And to think about whether disappearing could mean, you know, emerging from a community. It's an artist-run space originally, and maybe disappearing back into a community, and then working in a different way. I don't know. I feel like the space, and maybe that's a big potential of this moment, is to rethink the space as only one node in a network, rather than as the place where everything happens.
Yeah, it's also
but I think that will require a lot of, like, you know, infrastructural change, obviously, on a bigger level. It's like, it's a structural question.
Political, local political decisions. But also, when I think about it, when I listen to you talking about it, there's two thoughts, which is, one is like, well, it's just this forced precarity again. You know, that there was a sense of stability, I don't know, for a decade, and then it's like, now is this, you have to accept this forced precarity as an opportunity, which is like a bad thing, but it's also, of course, like, there's also a problem with a stagnant institution. You know, so if somebody's too stagnant in their ways and cannot adapt, and it's sort of an uncomfortable process. It's violent, sort of, in a way. I mean, from an artist studio perspective, it's sort of similar. Like, I have a good big studio in Lichtenberg and Berlin. I love it. But for me to balance my life properly, I have to be able to commute between Berlin and Amsterdam.
Yeah.
Twice a month. And that's not happening at the moment. So I'm just rethinking also this whole architecture of my practice. And the reason why I need both places is, you know, I need Berlin to make art, and I have friends, and I need Amsterdam just for like health insurance reasons. and you know, I have a partner here, and so it's like things that were sort of in a stable arrangement, that they kind of fell apart, which makes some pressure on the practice, but also it keeps you. I still have the deadlines. I still get the emails. Like, nobody knows. I mean, everybody has the same thing, but still, I keep getting a lot of like requests, or new requests for stuff that is like COVID responsive. And then I'm like, well, I don't even know what's happening. Like, do I have a studio? I guess I do, but I haven't seen it in a while. And like, I need to make a new artwork, but like, I don't want to have a company make a sculpture. I want to be the one to make it. And so this whole, but I can't, you know, and so, and in my case, I wouldn't call it precarity. It's just like, yet. I mean, if this is going on longer, I'll definitely, I'm finding myself in a very stressful, precarious situation. And then I just hope there will be some sort of, I don't know if I can rely on even an existence of a museum or like, for example, an art funding, because if you know, like a tax revenues plummet, there'll be no money for art funding and things like this, you know, at least like in European countries where that's how it circulates often. And so that's all that's been on my mind every day. I make tea and I'm trying to sit behind the computer. I'm like, okay, let's make a cute digital sculpture. But then I have like a matrix code of background thoughts going through my head. I'm sure a lot of other people who are even in the more stressful positions than I am, I'm like, you know, one of the success cases, I guess, because I'm not broke immediately. I'm going to be broke next, you know, in a few months. Yeah. And so it's just like, it's interesting, but I'm also, I just don't know how we should internalize this new precarity, like, because I think also the way this kind of the world has been going forward is that you accept that you cannot get a stable work contract, you accept that you cannot get a stable rent contract, you accept the instability, and then now it's just like might be a reason to even accelerate that instability for everybody. And this is just going to be like even more like, you know, what we also saw in 2016. It's just this like a turbo thing that might happen, and everything is just like up for kind of redestruction. And it's not even about the virus anymore. It's just about certain institutions and forces using the virus as an excuse to maybe dismantle certain things. Or maybe it might not go that way, but it can definitely. I mean, for example, the fact that people in Berlin got like 5,000 euros, you know, on their accounts very fast and efficiently, I think saved a lot of lives, you know, for artists.
Certainly. And at the same time, obviously, there's a huge negotiation going on at the moment, like how and if that money can be used and what it can be used for, right? And I feel like that is a whole other set of like insecurity that comes with receiving that money. Is that, again, in a way, it doesn't necessarily address the situation that most artists are in. That actually, they don't have to pay studio rents, and they probably just have to actually pay for their own apartment rent and living expenses, which the money isn't meant to be used for, right? So it's quite a double-edged sword, and I'm looking forward to how politics in Berlin will solve that, because I think that's a huge responsibility that they have, and I hope that they will use it wisely and understand that the freelancer or the condition of the freelancer has shifted in the last years, and that there's actually a huge part of the population that's basically working from home, but is nevertheless essential to society in a different sense than we've been speaking about earlier.
Yeah. And all their costs are technically personal costs, you know.
Yes, exactly, because your home is your site of production and your body is your tool, basically, right? And your mind. So what else do you have?
Yeah, exactly. Like
absolutely.
How do you write off your bed?
Just for technical reasons, as our channel will close down in the not too distant future, I'm curious, you deliberately wore a hoodie, Katja, with spirituality written on it, which all these people have seen. What does it mean in that in this context? Or it's just your favorite hoodie?
I mean, we picked Mars backgrounds as our digital backgrounds, and there's robots on the Mars called Curiosity, Opportunity, and Spirit. Spirit has died, so I'm the new one, spirituality.
Okay,
very Hegelian of you.
I don't know what it is, but yeah, no, it's just I just like dumb gimmicks. So that's
no, it's a really good one.
So for those, so for new Zoom audience members and for next time, as we start moving to the end of the session, there is a chat function in the middle of your screen at the bottom, where in future sessions, I can encourage you to write questions or commentary which appear on the right-hand column of your screen. It's a good way to speak directly to one of the speakers or to signal to the moderator you might have a question. For those of you unfamiliar with sign language, but who want to say thank you, to Katja and to Annika for today. In the last couple of years in international sign language and the world's deaf community, this has been adopted for clapping. So there we go. That's like jazz hands, you know. So there's a big clap to you both, yeah. And just because I was always a fan of the Adam West 1960s Batman television series, I'll announce, just like their voiceover announcer, please join us again next week at the same time on the same channel, when we'll discuss another aspect of this artistic cosmos with artist Alexei Terutz, curator Clementine Delis, and moderated by Mohammed. And Mohammed might take the chance to do the Batman thing, should he desire, to tell you that a week after that, we'll be joined for more discoveries by artist Simon Denny, curator Katja Inozemtseva, to be moderated by the Kosmosko Foundation's curator Alexander Burenkov. So my special thanks go to Katja, to Annika, and to the New Center, to Mohammed Salemi, and in the background, their online producer, Kazva Ramanian, who's been taking care of all of the techniques today, and my colleagues at Kosmosko, who have equally been in the background, making sure that we've been able to share this experience with you. So everybody, please enjoy your evenings, and let's see you again on Zoom and YouTube, same time, same channel next week. Thank you.
Oh, okay, bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, thank you, Simon, and thank you, Annika. I hope the rant was okay.
Yeah,
Katja, was a
I
great
learned something
pleasure.
about Mars, you know? Yeah. Good.
But so.